Admiral Kim Soo-jin stood perfectly still on the bridge of Lunar Station, watching the massive holographic display that filled the center of the command room. 50,000 alien warships floated in perfect formation around Earth like a deadly metal cloud. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, their hulls gleaming with strange metals and pulsing with energy that made the air itself feel heavy. The bridge crew sat at their stations without moving. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the station's life support systems and the distant rumble of the alien fleet's engines echoing through space. Kim Soo-jin could feel the eyes of every person on the bridge watching her, waiting for her reaction to what they all knew was coming. The communication system crackled to life with a sound like breaking glass. The voice that emerged was cold and mechanical, translated through alien technology into perfect Korean that somehow felt wrong in ways Kim Soo-jin could not explain. "Humans of Earth," the voice announced. "I am Admiral Thane of the Galactic Council Fleet. Your pitiful resistance ends today. For 3 long years we have shown you mercy. We blocked your trade routes and cut off your supplies, hoping you would see reason. We isolated your worlds and waited for you to understand your place in the galaxy." Kim Soo-jin's hands remained steady behind her back, but her knuckles were white. Beside her, Colonel Park Min-ho shifted slightly, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. The alien voice continued without pause. "You have been tested and found wanting. Your spirit is broken. Your people starve on their dying world. Your pathetic fleets hide in the shadows like scared children. Today you will surrender without conditions. You will accept relocation to the worlds we have chosen for you. You will live under our guidance and supervision for as long as we deem necessary." Around the bridge, Kim Soo-jin could hear the sharp intake of breath from her crew. Some of them had family on Earth. All of them had watched their world suffer under the Council's blockade for 3 terrible years. They had seen supply ships turned away at gunpoint. They had watched colonies go dark when their life support systems failed without replacement parts. The alien admiral's voice grew even colder. "Do not mistake our patience for weakness. Do not confuse our mercy with inability. We have crushed 1,000 worlds before yours. We have broken species far stronger and more advanced than humanity. You are nothing special. You are simply the latest problem to be solved." Kim Soo-jin turned slightly to look at Park Min-ho. Her second-in-command was a man she had served with for 15 years. They had fought pirates together in the outer systems. They had explored new worlds and made first contact with peaceful alien traders. They had built Lunar Station together, turning it from a simple research outpost into the nerve center of human space defense. Park Min-ho met her eyes and gave the smallest possible nod. Around them, the bridge crew continued their silent vigil. Communications officer Lee Soo-bin kept her hand steady on her controls, despite the tears running down her cheeks. Weapons specialist Choi Dong-wook stared at his dark screens, knowing that Lunar Station's few defensive guns would last perhaps 30 seconds against the massive fleet surrounding them. "You have 1 hour to broadcast your surrender to all human worlds and installations," Admiral Thane continued. "After that time, we will begin the cleansing of your planet. Those who resist will be eliminated. Those who comply will be relocated. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is the final judgment of the Galactic Council of Civilized Worlds." The transmission ended with a sharp click that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the bridge. For a long moment, nobody moved. The holographic display continued to show the alien fleet now beginning to shift into attack formation. Smaller ships peeled away from the main force and started moving toward Earth's atmosphere like drops of deadly rain. Kim Soo-jin walked slowly to the center of the bridge, her boots clicking softly on the metal floor. She reached the communication console and placed her hand on the activation switch. The bridge crew turned to watch her, their faces showing fear, anger, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. She thought about her daughter on Earth, probably watching the alien ships fill the sky above Seoul. She thought about the miners on Titan who had volunteered to stay at their posts even when their families begged them to come home. She thought about the deep space crews who had been running silent missions for months, invisible to Council sensors. Most of all, she thought about the secret transmission she had received just 3 days earlier. 5 words that had changed everything. "Phoenix Protocol is now active." Kim Soo-jin activated the comm system. Her voice was calm and clear as it broadcast across every human frequency in the solar system and beyond. "This is Earth's command to all human vessels, colonies, and installations. The Council has declared victory." She paused, watching the alien fleet begin its descent toward Earth. "We declare war." Dr. Li Jinwu stood in his underground laboratory, deep beneath the frozen surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon. The walls around him were lined with machines that hummed quietly in the artificial atmosphere. For 3 years, council inspectors had visited this place dozens of times. They had examined his equipment, read his reports, and watched his experiments. Every time they left, satisfied that he was just another human scientist trying to grow food for starving colonies. They had no idea what he was really building. Li Jinwu looked at the small device in his hands. It was no bigger than his thumb, made of metal that seemed to shift colors in the laboratory's bright lights. Inside, this tiny machine was 3 years of his life's work. 3 years of pretending to develop better crops while actually creating something the galaxy had never seen before. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. His assistant, Park Haijin, stood at the communication console. Her face was pale but determined. "Lunar Station's transmission just came through." Admiral Kim gave the order. Li Jinwu nodded slowly. He had been waiting for this moment since the council first surrounded Earth. He walked to his own communication panel and entered a code that he had memorized but never used. The screen flickered to life, showing a map of human space with hundreds of tiny dots scattered across dozens of star systems. "Activate Phoenix Protocol," he whispered into his communicator. The words traveled through space faster than light, carried by hidden transmitters that the council had never detected. On distant worlds and in the dark spaces between stars, humans, who had been waiting for 3 long years, finally received the signal they had been preparing for. Captain Han So-young was checking the cargo hold of her ship when the message reached her. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a simple trader hauling grain from the agricultural world of New Ceres to the struggling colonies near the Galactic Rim. Her ship looked old and slow, its hull marked with dents and scratches from years of honest work. The council patrol ships that had been following her for the past 2 days saw exactly what they expected to see. A desperate human trying to smuggle food to her own people. They were already planning how they would board her vessel and confiscate her cargo as punishment for violating the blockade. Han So-young smiled as she heard Li Jinwu's words. She walked to what appeared to be a simple storage locker and pressed her palm against a hidden scanner. The wall slid away to reveal a control room filled with weapons systems that belonged on a military destroyer, not a grain hauler. "All crew to battle stations," she announced over the ship's internal communication system. Around her, 20 men and women who had been pretending to be simple cargo handlers for 3 years, suddenly became the elite fighting force they had always been. The council patrol ships were still trying to understand what was happening when Han So-young's vessel opened fire. The weapons that emerged from hidden panels in her ship's hull were unlike anything in the council's databases. They fired projectiles that moved faster than anything the aliens had ever seen, and each shot carried enough power to crack a battleship's armor. The first council ship exploded before its captain could even send a distress signal. The second managed to raise its shields just in time to watch them fail completely against weapons designed specifically to penetrate council technology. Within minutes, an entire patrol squadron had been reduced to floating debris. Far away on the Galactic Rim, Commander Yoon Jae-soon received the same message in his control center deep underground. For 3 years, council survey teams had flown over his installation, cataloging what they believed was a struggling mining operation, barely managing to extract enough minerals to keep its workers alive. The council saw exactly what Yoon Jae-soon wanted them to see: a collection of simple buildings, some basic mining equipment, and a few hundred humans scraping out a living on a world with barely breathable air. The aliens had even felt sorry for the poor humans, trapped so far from home with no way to escape the blockade. They never suspected that beneath the surface, Yoon Jae-soon had been building something incredible. Hidden under kilometers of rock and ice, massive shipyards had been working day and night for years. Assembly lines that could build spacecraft faster than anything the council possessed had been turning out vessels designed from stolen alien technology and human innovation. When Phoenix Protocol activated, blast doors that had been sealed for 3 years finally opened from underground hangars that the council had never detected. Hundreds of warships rose into the sky. Each one was smaller than a council battleship, but faster and more maneuverable than anything the aliens had ever encountered. The ships spread out across the star system like angry hornets from a disturbed nest. Their first targets were the council monitoring stations that had been watching the mining operation. The aliens manning those stations had just enough time to realize they'd been completely fooled before the human ships opened fire. On 3 different worlds across council space, similar scenes played out simultaneously. Human agents who had been gathering intelligence for years activated sleeper cells that had been planted in key locations. Communication networks that the Council believed were secure suddenly began feeding false information to their commanders. While real human strike forces moved to attack positions, the Council had spent 3 years believing they were slowly starving humanity into submission. They had no idea that during those same 3 years, humanity had been preparing for the war that would reshape the galaxy forever. Captain Shin Dae-yoon gripped the armrests of her command chair as her ship twisted through hyperspace in ways that should have been impossible. Around her, the bridge crew worked at their stations with practiced efficiency, their faces lit by the strange blue glow of hyperspace outside the viewports. They were traveling through routes that human explorers had discovered decades ago, but never shared with the galaxy's other species. The Council believed they knew every hyperspace lane in this sector. Their star charts showed the official routes that all civilized ships were supposed to use. What they did not know was that humans had been secretly mapping hidden passages through hyperspace for generations, finding paths that cut through dimensions the Council had never imagined existed. Approaching target coordinates, reported Navigation Officer Kim Min-jun from his station, dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds. Shin Dae-yoon looked around at her crew. These were not regular military personnel. They were volunteers who had given up everything to fight this war. Engineer Cho Soo-min had left her family on Mars to serve on this mission. Weapons specialist Jung Hae-won had been a university professor before the blockade began. Communications Officer Bae Yun-soo was barely 20 years old and had never seen combat before today. "Remember what we are here to do," Shin Dae-yoon said quietly. "We are not conquerors, we are teachers. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you threaten humanity's survival." The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and suddenly, the viewports filled with the sight of Ultras Prime. The planet was a beautiful blue and green world surrounded by the largest collection of orbital shipyards in Council space. Massive construction platforms floated in perfect formation around the planet, each one capable of building the huge battleships that formed the backbone of the Council fleet. For a moment, Shin Dae-yoon allowed herself to admire the engineering achievement before her. The Altarians were master builders, and their shipyards were works of art as much as they were industrial facilities under different circumstances. She might have enjoyed visiting this place as a tourist or a trading partner. Those circumstances no longer existed. "All ships, this is Strike Leader," she announced on the tactical frequency. "Begin the lesson." Around her ship, dozens of other human vessels suddenly appeared as they dropped out of hyperspace. They had approached from different directions, using routes the Council had never detected. The Altarian defense fleet was caught completely off guard. Their ships scattered around the system on routine patrol duties. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed almost impossible. They had trained for this moment for years, practicing the attack in virtual reality simulations, until every pilot knew exactly what to do. They struck the orbital shipyards with precision that would have impressed the Council's military academies if those academies still existed. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans did not fight like the Council's member species, who preferred long-range combat with massive energy weapons. Instead, they used small, fast ships that darted between the orbital platforms like angry insects, striking at weak points the Altarians had never thought to defend. Shin Dae-yoon watched her tactical display as the battle unfolded. Her ships were targeting the shipyard's power systems and construction equipment, not the living areas where Altarian workers might be hiding. This was not a war of genocide. It was a war of demonstration. "Platform 7 is offline," reported Jung Hae-won from the weapons station. "Platform 12 is venting atmosphere. Platform 15 just lost main power." The Altarian defense ships tried to respond, but they were designed to fight other large vessels in traditional space battles. They were not equipped to deal with human fighters that attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Their massive guns could not track targets that moved like nothing they had ever encountered. 6 hours later, the battle was over. The orbital shipyards that had been the pride of the Altarian Empire were floating scrap metal. The planet's surface was untouched, but its ability to build warships for the Council had been completely destroyed. On the other side of Council space, Colonel Nom Kite sat in a small room filled with communication equipment that hummed quietly. In the darkness, for months, he and his team had been carefully infiltrating the Zephyrian communication networks. The Zephyrians were proud of their advanced technology and their supposedly unbreakable encryption systems. They had never suspected that human computer specialists could break their codes faster than they could create new ones. Every message the Council sent was now being read by human intelligence officers before it reached its intended destination. Battle plans, supply schedules, troop movements, and strategic discussions were all being monitored and analyzed. "Sir," said Technical Specialist Oh Su from his workstation, "the Council is sending emergency reinforcements to the Alterus system. They want to know what happened to their shipyards." Namkite smiled grimly. "Let them wander. Make sure their reinforcements take the longest possible route to get there. I want them to spend the next 3 days trying to figure out how we destroyed their most important industrial center." Across the galaxy, Council commanders were discovering that their communication systems had been compromised for months. Orders they thought were secret had been anticipated by human forces. Supply convoys they believed were hidden were being intercepted. Intelligence reports they trusted were being altered to spread confusion and fear. The proud species who had joined the crusade against humanity were beginning to understand that they were not fighting a primitive civilization. They were fighting an enemy that had spent 3 years learning everything about them while revealing nothing about itself. Admiral Kim Soo-jin stood on the bridge of her flagship as it dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the new Olympia system. Through the massive viewport, she could see the Council's capital world hanging in space like a jewel, surrounded by more defensive stations and weapon platforms than any other planet in the galaxy. This was the heart of the empire that had tried to destroy humanity, and now she had come to cut that heart out. "Fleet status report," she ordered quietly. "All ships in position." Admiral replied her communications officer. 200 vessels ready for battle. Ground forces standing by. For deployment, Kim Soo-jin nodded. 200 ships was a tiny fleet compared to the thousands of vessels the Council could field. But these were not ordinary warships. Each one had been built using 3 years of stolen alien technology combined with human engineering. They were faster, more maneuverable, and carried weapons that the Council's defenses had never been designed to stop. "Send the message," she said. Across all Council frequencies. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "People of New Olympia, this is Admiral Kim Soo-jin of the Human Defense Fleet. Your leaders declared victory over Earth. They promised to relocate us to worlds of their choosing. We are here to relocate them instead." The orbital defense platforms around New Olympia immediately opened fire, filling space with energy beams and missile swarms that would have destroyed any normal attacking fleet. But the human ships moved like schools of fish, flowing around the incoming fire with an grace that seemed almost alive. They had studied the Council's defensive systems for years, learning every weakness and blind spot. The battle for the orbital defenses lasted 3 days. The humans did not try to destroy the platforms with brute force like the Council expected. Instead, they used precision strikes to disable key systems, turning the mighty fortresses into floating metal shells. When the last platform fell silent, the way to New Olympia's surface was clear. Colonel Park Min-ho led the ground assault, commanding 10,000 soldiers who dropped from orbit in small pods that scattered across the capital city like seeds in the wind. The Council's ground forces had been expecting a traditional invasion with large landing craft and obvious targets. They were not prepared for soldiers who appeared everywhere at once and fought with tactics no civilized species had ever used. The humans did not try to capture territory or hold strategic positions. They moved through the city like water flowing around rocks, striking at command centers and communication hubs before disappearing into the maze of streets and buildings. The Council's soldiers found themselves fighting an enemy they could never quite see, never quite catch. Park Min-ho himself led a small team through the underground tunnels beneath the government district. The Council leaders had believed these passages were secret, but human intelligence had mapped them months ago. Every security system, every hidden entrance, every emergency escape route was already known to the attacking forces. "Building secured," reported Captain Lee Sang-woo over the radio. "Government complex is ours." "Acknowledged," Park Min-ho replied. "Continue to the emergency bunkers. The Council leadership is probably hiding there." Above ground, the fighting continued with an intensity that shocked the galaxy. The humans did not follow the traditional rules of warfare that the Council considered civilized. They fought in the shadows, used the city's own infrastructure against its defenders, and showed a level of determination that made even veteran soldiers nervous. On the 4th day of the ground battle, the proud Korathi announced that withdrawal from the war. The Korathi were considered the greatest military strategists in the galaxy, the species that had planned the Council's campaign against humanity. Their decision to leave sent shockwaves through the remaining Council forces. "The humans are not fighting a war," transmitted Admiral Verkesh of the Karathi 4th Armada just before his fleet jumped to hyperspace. "They are fighting for survival. There is a difference that makes them infinitely more dangerous." The Karathi withdrawal came after they lost their entire 4th Armada to a human ambush near the Centauri system. The ambush had been planned with a precision that impressed even the Karathi themselves. The humans had used fake distress signals to lure the Karathi ships into a trap, then struck from 6 different directions simultaneously. Other Council species began to question whether the war was worth continuing. The Altarians had lost their shipyards, the Zephyrians had lost their communication networks, the Karathi had lost their most experienced fleet. Every day brought news of another defeat, another system fall into human forces. On the 14th day of the siege, Captain Shin Dayun led her Special Forces team into the deepest emergency bunker beneath New Olympia's government district. Bunker had been designed to survive direct orbital bombardment and could theoretically hold out for years under siege. But it had not been designed to stop humans who had spent months learning its every weakness. The surviving Council leaders huddled in their emergency chamber as Shin Dayun's team cut through the final blast doors. These were the same aliens who had confidently announced humanity's defeat just 2 weeks earlier. Now they cowered in the darkness, finally understanding what they had awakened. "Surrender," Shin Dayun announced as her soldiers secured the bunker. "The war is over. You have lost." The Council leaders looked up at her with expressions of fear and disbelief. They had ruled the galaxy for centuries, commanding thousands of worlds and trillions of beings. They had never imagined that a single species could bring their empire to its knees. They were learning that they had never truly understood what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. Admiral Kim Sujin walked slowly through the broken remains of what had once been the most powerful building in the galaxy. The Council chambers on New Olympia were a ruin of twisted metal and shattered stone, their golden walls blackened by weapons, fire, and their magnificent ceiling collapsed in several places. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, casting strange shadows on the floor where the most important decisions in galactic history had once been made. 6 months had passed since the siege ended. 6 months since the Council's surrender. 6 months since the galaxy had learned that humanity was not the weak species they had believed it to be. Now, representatives from dozens of former Council worlds sat on simple metal chairs in the ruins, waiting to hear what their future would hold. Kim Sujin stopped in front of the group and looked at each face in turn. There were Altarians whose blue skin seemed pale with worry. There were Zephyrians, their tall forms hunched with defeat. There were members of species she had never seen before, all of them former allies of the Council who now found themselves at the mercy of the humans they had tried to destroy. "You declared victory over Earth," she said calmly, her voice echoing in the damaged chamber. "You announced that humanity would be relocated to worlds of your choosing. You promised that we would live under your supervision for as long as you deemed necessary." The representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some of them had been present when those declarations were made. Others had cheered when the news reached their home worlds. All of them remembered the confidence they had felt when 50,000 Council ships surrounded the small blue planet called Earth. "Earth came to collect," Kim Sujin continued, "but we are not here to rule you." A murmur of surprise ran through the assembled representatives. They had expected harsh terms, perhaps slavery or execution. They had prepared themselves for the kind of brutal conquest that the Council itself had inflicted on dozens of worlds over the centuries. The idea that humanity might want something different had not occurred to them. Dr. Lee Skinwu stepped forward from where he had been standing quietly near the damaged wall. The scientist who had spent 3 years secretly developing weapons that could destroy entire fleets now looked tired but peaceful. In his hands he carried not instruments of war but medical scanners and healing devices. "You thought civilization meant submission to the strong," Li Jinwu said gently. "You believed that the galaxy should be ruled by whoever had the biggest guns and the most ships. We are here to show you that true civilization means cooperation among equals." He gestured to a large holographic display that flickered to life in the center of the ruined chamber. The display showed a map of the galaxy, but it looked nothing like the old Council territories. Instead of the rigid borders and hierarchical zones that had defined galactic politics for centuries, the map showed a network of connected worlds linked by trade routes and communication lines. "This is the Confederation of Worlds," Kim Soo explained. "Every species has a voice in its government. Every world receives protection from aggression. Every member has the right to live according to their own culture and traditions. The Altarian representative, an elderly female with intricate tattoos covering her arms, raised her hand hesitantly. What about those who refuse to join? What about worlds that prefer to remain independent? They remain independent, Kim Sujin replied simply. The Confederation does not force membership on anyone, but we do enforce one simple rule. Aggression against any member world means war with all member worlds. Commander Yoon Jae-sung entered the chamber from a side door, accompanied by a group of individuals from different species working together on some kind of construction project. His mining operation had been revealed as a massive military installation, but now he was using those same facilities for a very different purpose. The first joint species colony is being established in the Kepler system, he reported. Altarian engineers are working with human architects to design new cities. Zephyrian farmers are sharing agricultural techniques with settlers from Earth. Former enemies are becoming neighbors and friends. One of the Zephyrian representatives stood up, his tall frame making him tower over the others. How do we know? You will not become like the Council. How do we know that once you have power, you will not use it to oppress others as we did? Captain Han Soyoung stepped into the chamber, having just returned from a diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim territories. Her ship, which had once disguised itself as a simple grain hauler, now served as a mobile embassy, carrying human diplomats to worlds that wanted to learn more about the Confederation. Because we remember what it felt like to be oppressed, she answered. We remember what it was like to watch our children go hungry because of someone else's blockade. We remember the fear of not knowing if our world would survive another day. We will never inflict that suffering on others. The chamber fell silent as the representatives considered her words. Many of them had grown up in the Council's empire, where might made right and the strong dominated the weak. The idea of a government based on cooperation rather than conquest was difficult for them to understand. Kim Sujin walked to the center of the chamber and looked up through one of the holes in the ceiling at the stars visible in the darkening sky. Human patrol ships moved among those stars now, not as conquerors but as guardians, protecting trade routes and keeping the peace between former enemies. The galaxy has learned something important, she said quietly. Humanity's greatest strength was never our weapons or our tactics. It was our ability to turn enemies into allies, to build something greater than the sum of its parts. She turned back to face the assembled representatives. The age of human protection has begun. But it is not protection through fear or domination. It is protection through friendship, cooperation, and the promise that no world will ever again face extinction alone.